Hey, how are you doing, everyone? So welcome into our first attempt at a mock draft, or at least breaking down the 2022 Fantasy Football Draft Board. In today's episode, I will be drafting myself the entire first round of the 2022 Draft Board. The reasoning for doing this is that right now ADP is still very, very poor. I actually just went through a mock draft with the SFS community Discord server. The invite link to that is in the description of today's episode. But if anyone went on auto pick, or if just simply someone missed their draft pick or whatever, the timer runs out, it was a complete mess, and I found myself drafting for like 4 other teams who just were on or offline rather. And it's just a really tough task right now to draft without having an updated ADP system or something. Some sort of ranking system here in Sleeper to make things a little bit more updated, because you've got guys who were really deep sleepers last year that were fantastic players. Just off the top of my head, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Marquise Brown, both players that were sitting down there and being drafted in the late 9th and 10th round, and that's just not something you want to see happen because it's not realistic whatsoever. So I'm going to give my best crack at my top 12. This is certainly probably not how draft boards are going to play out come next season. This is just my guess, my prediction, my evaluation of how the board sits at this moment in time and how I would draft the board today if 2022 fantasy football started right now. Today's early 2022 fantasy football mock draft is presented by Manscaped. Head over to their website, manscaped.com, by using the link in the description of today's episode or by checking out the pinned comment section of today's video. On their site, you'll find a site-wide 20% off and free shipping straight to you when you use promo code SIZZLE at checkout and get yourself hooked up with one or multiple of their fantastic products that'll get your 2022 started off on the right foot with items like this right here, the Lawnmower 4.0. This bad boy, my experience with it has been fantastic. It's great. Anti-nick technology has kept me from having some severe and fatal injuries when I'm grooming up myself below the belt. And this awesome light right here, which you can see, I think, helps you make sure that you're not getting lost in the jungle and, again, having any fatal incidents when you are using their great products. So go check out manscaped.com. A huge thank you to them for sponsoring today's episode. Code SIZZLE, 20% off and free shipping. I don't know how you could start your new year off any better. All right, thank you, Manscaped, for sponsoring today's episode. Now, we're going to get into our draft board. 12 picks, what I would do with every single one of them, 1 through 12, if I am the team owner of each of these 12 different groups. So, again, this is not exactly how the board is going to play out next season. Things are going to change. Unfortunately, some of these players are probably going to get injured. We saw that happen last season, whether it was Cam Akers, a later first-round pick. We even saw Saquon Barkley's injury timeline get extended in that draft, or drove his ADP backward. Things happen. So this is my estimation if the board started today. With the 1.1 draft position, though, I think that this is where you're going to get a fairly low amount of pushback from anyone out there. I think that the consensus-wide draft position here with the 1.1 is Jonathan Taylor, our 1.1, or not our 1.1, our number 1 overall running back for the 2021 season. JT was fantastic this year, led the National Football League in rush yards. Oop, I'm going to turn off that audio right there. Led the National Football League in rushing yards, had himself a really, really productive season. He was the NFL leader in yards after contact. He had stats that were out of this world when you talk about having a player who was, having graphics put up next to his name, comparing his stretch of 100 scrimmage yard game and rushing touchdown performances with that of LaDainian Tomlinson. JT was absolutely fantastic, and you get that offensive line carrying over into the 2022 season. Obviously, having Quentin Nelson as a pulling guard is something that cannot be taken very lightly. So, Jonathan Taylor, my number 1 draft pick. I don't think, again, there's too many question marks about this one. You could have a varying opinion or have a slightly different approach to this one, but I think at the end of the day, even the question marks we had for Jonathan Taylor heading into this season were addressed. He was able to overcome Carson Wentz's terrible turnovers. He still had those this year. Those didn't just disappear with the Frank Reich-led Colts offensive, game script and play calling. That was still a struggle and Wentz had his fair share of boneheaded interceptions or lost fumbles this year, including a play where he sprained both of his ankles. So JT overcame it all. He's explosive. He can catch the football. He is the ideal makeup of what an NFL workhorse running back is. I have no question that I would draft him 1.1 overall if he were, if I were drafting today. At the number 2 draft position, another one that I don't think is going to have too much pushback is Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. Now, obviously, Derrick Henry missed a ton of this season. We are just now getting him back here in the NFL divisional rounds. This is being recorded just a couple of days prior to Super Wildcard Weekend is what they're calling it this year. But the Tennessee Titans are on bye week because they clinched the AFC's number 1 seed in spite of losing Derrick Henry after just playing 8 games. So, again, something very interesting to check in on here is that Derrick Henry had dang near 1,000 rush yards in just his 8 games. He had 937 to be exact. 10 rushing touchdowns. He was on pace to have back-to-back 2,000-yard rushing seasons, which is something that is quite unprecedented to do. And he was doing all this while being the focal point and the identity of this Titans offense for yet another year, and while having arguably a lesser offensive line than he's had in years past. So what he was doing this season was nothing short of exceptional. He's a completely dominant player, maybe more dominant than Jonathan Taylor even when he's healthy and out there. But the one question mark, the one reason obviously I think that we take JT over him is the lack of injury history for Jonathan Taylor. Now, Derrick Henry's injury history is very, very small, and it's a very clean slate. This past year was the first time we really saw him miss an extended period of time or land on the injured reserve. And the other thing that kind of causes question and concern is the fact that he's entering into his age 29 season. So we have those questions about, shelf life. How much longer will Derrick Henry remain a top-level fantasy back? You talk about him being 29 years of age, but obviously there is the context that early in his career, he wasn't the lead back for this Tennessee offense. It was DeMarco Murray in the later stages of his NFL career. And Jonathan Taylor kind of on the flip side, if you're looking at this from a Dynasty perspective, which obviously this is a redraft board. But JT, right off the bat, got the workhorse numbers in his rookie season. Just if you look to the back stretch, the back 8 games of that year. So Derrick Henry for me is the 1.2 draft pick. We even saw him increase his receiving usage with the Titans last year up to over 2 receptions per game, which is not very much, but for Derrick Henry's standards, that is an improvement from the rest of his career. I really like the opportunity here. I am confident in him next season. And barring injury or some sort of freak accident, I think this is a slam dunk to be a very safe second overall draft pick. Now, picks 3 through 12 is where things get interesting. I probably just laid out a bunch of information you already knew. And like I said before, each of those 2 players, I don't expect much pushback or disagreement with those picks. Who knows? Maybe I'm crazy and you guys think it should be flipped, vice versa, or what do I know? But here at the 1.3 pick and moving forward is where I think that things get a bit more unique. I have my differing perspectives, and I would love to chat with you guys in the comment section below based on whatever your views are and what your projections are heading into next season. I love having that conversation. If you'd love to engage in more fantasy football talk, again, the SFS Community Discord server is available to be joined in the description of today's episode. So go check that out. Here, if I had the 1.3 draft position, we'll see if I can scroll and find him here, I would draft Austin Ekeler today. If the fantasy football draft season, if my league was on the clock today, I would select Austin Ekeler with the 1.3 pick. Now, I will put context behind this. Obviously, I'm going to go relatively well in depth with each of these picks and explain my thought process here. But at this point in time, and I should have prefaced this again, I always forget to do this in videos, this is a half PPR draft. So I try and keep this as neutral as possible in terms of scoring formats. I will do a very heavy amount of PPR drafts during the summertime. But while we're here in the January months, in the cold heart of winter, I'll be doing half PPR most of the time, or if not, I will preface that in either the thumbnail or the title of the video. But again, I'm sorry for not putting that out there right away to start today's episode. Austin Ekeler is an incredibly dynamic back that I think has a great shot to... I think he will pull back from what he did here in 2021, but I think he has a great shot to be another top 5 to 7 RB in 2022, and I would say closer to that RB4 or 5 range than having him down at 7. I'm just really confident in his skill set, and in particular the situation he plays for. Being a member of this Chargers offense is something I don't think that you can take too lightly or undervalue. And the fact that he is the 3-down back for that team, they give him power opportunities to be the goal line rusher for this team. They give him the opportunity to be the pass catching back, in which is probably his largest skill set and what he's best at doing. He's shifty, he's elusive, he can find the crack in the blocking scheme. I love everything that Austin Ekeler is as a player. Now, the reason I say that I expect some pullback and some regression from him next year is the fact that his volume isn't that crazy in terms of the touches he sees per game, but I also think that that can play to his benefit here for his longevity and keeping him healthy and on his feet. He just saw over 17 touches per game in 2021, which again is no ridiculous marker to be at when you talk about a guy like a Joe Mixon, who is a player that sees over 18.25 rushing attempts per game. This is total touches for Austin Ekeler. So I think that keeps his workload fairly light for running back standards, and again keeps him healthy and on his feet as a smaller player. But a fun fact, Austin Ekeler is the strongest pound for pound player in the National Football League, whatever that means. I just saw it on Instagram like 5 months ago. All right, moving on here. So Austin Ekeler, the reason finally, after beating around the bush for 5 minutes, that I see him pulling back even slightly and why I would draft him down here at number 3, but still keep him so high on my board, is that he had 20 total touchdowns. And touchdown dependency, I mean, first and foremost, touchdowns are awesome. Touchdowns give you 6 points per play in all scoring formats for standard PPR, half PPR. Skill positions, a rushing or receiving touchdown is getting you that 6 points every single time at minimum, on top of either the reception value bonus or even the yardage that they pick up to score that touchdown. 20 is a lot though. And you look at last year's RB1, Alvin Kamara, and the 20 plus touchdowns he had, and he pulled back significantly this year. It's just hard to expect year-over-year touchdown production to remain at such an elite level, even if you look at another offense that was fantastic at a different position. Davante Adams, for example, he had 18 touchdowns in 2020, and he pulled back to 11, which is still a great marker, but you're losing 7 TDs. That's 42 fantasy points. That makes a difference over the course of a season and reflects a different level of dominance, or however extreme your point scoring was on a week-to-week basis. So I think if that number pulls back to somewhere around 14 or 15 total touchdowns, again, that's rushing and receiving, and Ekeler, being such a dynamic player, does an excellent job and brings a lot to the table in both those departments. I just don't think we can expect him to be at that elite of a level once again next year. Now, the reason and the argument that I'll present for why he could do that, again, is because he plays for the Chargers. Justin Herbert is exactly what you want in your quarterback situation. Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, 2 fantastic wide receivers. This team, as long as Justin Herbert's under center and healthy, is going to move the football and have countless opportunities to punch the ball in for 6 and score touchdowns. So I think that that's one argument where you could potentially see a minuscule decline. Maybe he drops down to 17 total touchdowns, just because this team has the offensive capability to reach such an elite level. So Austin Ekeler is my 1.3. Again, the main points here, he's dynamic. He plays for an offense with a quarterback that I feel very strongly and have a very strong belief in. And then the skill set is just fantastic and something I feel very, very good about here. So at the 1.4 pick, that was a bit of a long-winded explanation there, certainly much longer than Henry and Jonathan Taylor. We're going to go Dalvin Cook. And I think that Dalvin Cook still hangs on to the last running back I'm going to take consecutively here before I draft my first wide receiver off the board, is the fact that I think that the Vikings have an interesting opportunity right now to help this offense take the next step forward in the right direction. And what I mean by that is that Mike Zimmer has been the coach of the Vikings for 7-8 years now, relieved of his duties. They also fired the GM. And there's the chance that they bring in a complete change of scenery and bring in offensive personnel and offensive coaches, in particular an offensive-minded head coach or an upgrade at the offensive coordinator position that will really help this team get to where it needs to go. I think that you can say what you want about Kirk Cousins. Yes, he's not an elite NFL quarterback. If he's not playing on 12 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, he's probably not playing the most comfortable football he's ever played, and he struggles a bit. But the skill players this team has are so elite. When you look at Dalvin Cook in the backfield, Alex Madison, one of the best reserve running backs, and by that I mean a non-starter on an NFL roster. When you look at Justin Jefferson, who might already be a top 3 NFL wide receiver coming out of his second year in the NFL, I mean, the ceiling for him is enormous. And you have Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne, who are also very talented pass catchers. Irv Smith Jr. will come back next year off of the injury he suffered early on this year. Tyler Conklin was a really nice emerging player, and then they went out and traded for Chris Herndon, who didn't really do much of anything this season. But nonetheless, you do have skilled players in this offense. You have the personnel surrounding Kirk Cousins that he needs to succeed. If this offense can improve next year and increase their level of output as an entire team, the trickle-down effect of that is going to result in more fantasy points going around to these other players. And obviously, Dalvin Cook is at the center of that conversation. He is arguably the most valuable player in that offense for fantasy football purposes, and I think there's just a lot that can be taken from this. He's one of the most electrifying runners in open space. He has a fantastic skill set. He can catch the football. He's no Alvin Kamara, no Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler in the receiving game, but he is certainly someone who can take a screen pass and take it to the house for 75 yards because of that open field speed. So I love the skill set here. I think Dalvin Cook has the opportunity to be a top 3 running back if he's able to maximize his ceiling and get back to some of the things that we've seen him do earlier on in his career. He did miss a few games this year, but I think that's something that's calculated into his draft prices, that he does tend to have some of those nagging injuries, and he does have some of those risks associated with him that he might miss a game here and there. So I would certainly make it a point of emphasis. And not only for Dalvin Cook, but I think if you're going to draft a running back in the top 5, or heck, you're a top fantasy running back, one of my beliefs is if you have enough bench space on your roster, you should probably just go out and handcuff them, unless you're going to draft enough running backs throughout the rest of the draft to be plug-and-play starters if something were to happen to one of your top fantasy backs. I would certainly make sure you have that handcuff position addressed so that you're not in a total pickle if something were to happen, because we saw outside of Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, and Dalvin Cook, 3 of my top 4 picks all missed sometime this year, whether it was injuries, COVID. Obviously, Derrick Henry's case was a bit more extreme with that foot, but a lot of stuff can happen in the National Football League, especially at the running back position. Now we get into the number 5 pick. This is where I go receiver. I'm going to take Cooper Kupp here, and the reason for that is simply how dominant he was this season. I think there's a very clear-cut case for why he should be a top 5 pick in fantasy drafts, especially if you're picking in a PPR league. You just talk about what he did in year 1 with Matthew Stafford is off the charts. Look at Aaron Rodgers in year 1 with Matt LaFleur. He didn't even toss 30 touchdown passes. In year 2, he increased by over 20 and went to 48 TD passes. Now, Matthew Stafford, I'm not going to say he's going to go throw for 65 touchdowns, but we do have an extra game this season, so maybe he could be in the high 50s. You never know. If he takes down the interceptions he had this year, he led the National Football League in that category. And just continues to progress as a player and learn more in Sean McVay's system. He had 41 TDs again here in year 1 in this system. So if he takes that, usually quarterbacks and head coaches, the trend is that year 2 is much more successful than year 1. If he shows even a slight improvement and becomes more efficient, has less turnovers, you're going to see, and in particular increases that touchdown count. That doesn't necessarily mean that Cooper Kupp is going to see an improvement from what he did this past year, because he was, after all, just 17 yards shy of breaking Calvin Johnson's single-season receiving yards record. But what it does mean for me is sustained success. I have a lot of trust and faith in what these two are. Just as football players, the chemistry they have, it was incredible what they built in just one offseason. I can't imagine what these two are going to put together as we move into their second season. As I stated, that's the main argument I have for drafting him this high. This is even higher than I would have taken a Devontae Adams this past offseason if you took all of the Aaron Rodgers drama that we went through last summer out of things, or I don't know if you want to call it drama, but the whole holdout conversation potentially and retirement stuff. So Cooper Kupp to me is a better prospect heading into next season because of the raw target volume, the receptions, the usage. If you were to compare a 2022 Cooper Kupp to an incoming 2021 Devontae Adams, I would take Cooper Kupp. You call it recency bias, whatever you might want to do, but I'm a Green Bay Packer fan, so this is coming from a place of unbiased opinion here. I really like what Cooper Kupp brings to the table. Again, I would be absolutely drooling over him in a PPR league, that being a full PPR league. So the touchdowns, 16 of them, almost averaged 1 per game. Like we talked about with Austin Eckler, that's something that can potentially regress back to the mean. But with how much faith Matt Stafford has in Cooper Kupp, I think I feel pretty strongly and pretty confident that that number will remain afloat here as we enter into next season. Back into the running back crop, that's the trend here for the first round. You have to get yourself a very viable fantasy RB1 in the early rounds of the draft. I'm going to go Alvin Kamara, and I'm going to go Alvin Kamara over Christian McCaffrey, and I might as well talk about these next 2 picks in one here and put them both up on the board because I have Christian McCaffrey going at the 1.7. Obviously, a value steal if he's able to stay healthy, if he's able to suit up and play a requisite amount of games. However, he's played 10 games in the last 2 seasons, and he has missed 20. So that's no bueno. You don't like to see that. He only played 3 games in 2020. I believe he actually scored over 20 points in all 3 of those games, and then he played 7 games here in 2021, and then obviously missed the other games. So it has been, I should say, quite the 2 trips around the sun for Christian McCaffrey, missing way more time than he'd like to. There was trade rumors going around for like 48 hours that the Panthers would take calls for him, but then their GM quickly shot that information down. So I expect him to be a Panther. The biggest concern that I have with both of these players is the QB situation, which I think is equally bad for both teams, potentially worse for Christian McCaffrey. It looked like Alvin Kamara was getting it figured out and starting to catch passes and being used as that efficient player when Jameis Winston happened to get injured. Like 2 weeks prior to Jameis tearing his ACL against Tampa Bay, Alvin Kamara was starting to be factored back into the receiving game. We were seeing him not have so many rushing attempts and be all banged up. I talked about this in my top 10 RB rankings for 2022 episode earlier on this week. I think I posted that on Monday or Tuesday. Essentially, what I said was that Alvin Kamara, what makes him so great is his pass catching value and the efficiency he has, and how when he catches a pass in the flat and runs out of bounds, he's not getting tackled on that play. Therefore, he's staying healthier, staying cleaner, and injuries aren't as big of a concern. But when you hand it off on an inside zone or a trap play, heck, if you run power with him, you are getting him wailed on by 250 to 320 pound players every single time, and he's being tackled, twisted, and all wrapped up in those bodies. So that makes a big difference for a player who is such an electric pass catcher, someone who can give you so much. And that's why he was so great with Drew Brees, because he was the king of spacing the football field, making the right read, the right decision, and timing. That was what Drew Brees was all about. He didn't have this rocket arm that was going to sail the football downfield. He just made the right read, made the quick play, and beat you with his cerebral ability. That's something that the Saints have been lacking, especially after Jameis went down. And Jameis Winston is no Drew Brees, but he was certainly the best and most competent quarterback option this team had last year. So I'll be really interested for both the Panthers and the Saints to figure out who that quarterback is going to be next year, because that's going to be the story, I think, of their 2022 offseason and season, because that's going to be a big deal. I would be totally fine if the Saints just brought back Jameis Winston. Hopefully Michael Thomas returns back to the field. Who knows what his mental space is at these days in terms of his satisfaction with the Saints front office and coach Sean Payton. There's a little bit of a rift there early last fall, and obviously he had a setback and never ended up suiting up for a game. So, and then you look at CMC. He had time with Cam Newton. He had time with Sam Darnold, PJ Walker. Actually, I'm not sure if CMC actually was available for a PJ Walker game, but nonetheless, their QB situation is just as bad, if not worse. I don't think Sam Darnold's it. I think that you either have to trade for Deshaun Watson and hope that all that stuff clears, or you got to look at another route, maybe the draft. But this is a weaker quarterback class, and we'll get into that in our NFL draft evaluation videos and whatnot. Go check out our TikTok. I plan on putting up a lot of player profile evaluation breakdowns. For those of you interested in that, the link to our social medias are in the description of today's episode. So I think that covers those 2 picks there. Again, I am Alvin Kamara over Christian McCaffrey. For one, the injuries. Yes, Kamara got nicked at the end of the season, was dealing with a knee injury. He missed an unfortunately large amount of time as well. However, right now I am more confident in that situation, and I think that having a Jameis Winston-led offense is still better than having a Sam Darnold-led offense, and I think that situation matters a whole lot here when you break down these players and their fantasy value. So now we're going to go back into the receiver department, and we're going to take Davante Adams here at the 1.8 draft position. My thought process behind this is that I think that Davante Adams with Aaron Rodgers is where I would take him here at this 1.8 spot. Coming from a Packer fan, what makes the magic between these two players is the chemistry. And I think that if Davante Adams goes to another situation, that is something that won't be an instant click. And it's years and years of, if you listen to the Aaron Rodgers Tuesdays on the Pat McAfee show, it's subtle gestures in between Rodgers and Adams, communication that they have from their extended time together. They just know exactly where the football is going, exactly what route's going to be run to what spot on the field, and other players just can't speak for that in the NFL. And I think that it's unprecedented what a Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford were able to accomplish this year, especially with everything going on with COVID protocols and restrictions and offseason rules and whatnot. But that's something that Davante and Aaron had to work for. Excuse me. And, you know, when you talk about that, that's how Davante is a player who in 5 of his last 6 seasons has double-digit touchdown receptions, and this year was able to break the receiving yardage record because of how in sync these two are as quarterback and wide receiver, and just how dang good that chemistry is. So I think it's an incredibly safe pick. It's a lock to be a wide receiver 1 play, a top 12 player week in and week out. Even if he doesn't score a touchdown, it seems like he's always got requisite yards. He doesn't really have bust performances. Obviously not to the extreme that Cooper Kupp did, who had double-digit targets in all but 1 game this year. So Davante, it's fantastic. You get the touchdowns, you get the upside, you get the elite quarterback, the elite offensive production. It's all there. You get the talent, the situation, everything bundled up into a recipe for success. And I think what is honestly at the 1.8 spot a can't-miss player, I think that there are other picks on the board, especially at the running back position, that have upside and the potential to be elite fantasy plays, but I think that you are going a safe route here and ensuring that you're setting yourself up for a successful round 2 pick if you draft Adams here 1.8 or later in the first round. Again, that's just how I feel about it today. However, now at 1.9, I will dive back into the running back crop, and I'm actually going to draft Joe Mixon, the 2021 RB3, so a player who exceeded his draft position this year. Obviously, great news for Joe Mixon there. He was fantastic this year, and something I talked about again, going back and referencing one more time, that RB rankings video. Go check that one out if you haven't done so already. You can find it on my channel. Just, you know, click the little SFS logo next to the subscribe button. If you haven't subscribed either, you should do that as well. We're trying to grow the community here and have a great 2022 offseason. Joe Mixon experienced what I call the Joe Burrow effect, and that is just the fact that Joe Burrow elevated this offense to the next level. The downfield passing game really opened up the run game, and this offense was clicking. And this is an offensive-driven football team and a quarterback that I trust in. And the one thing I wish they would get better at is offensive line, because I think that would help Joe Mixon's case a lot, especially for a player who sees such high levels of volume and usage on a week-to-week basis. But I think that as long as, you know, you're hearing me say this over and over again, situation is so important for fantasy players, because if you're in the right situation to succeed and you're in the right involvement and having the proper usage levels for your team, it's almost impossible for you to go wrong. That's why something like an Alvin Kamara or a Christian McCaffrey can easily be a bust here in the first round. I'm taking them higher because I think their ceiling is still better than that of a Joe Mixon. And obviously when they're healthy, I think that they're still better prospects. But you look at the situations of the Saints and the Panthers offenses, and you feel a lot less confident and you feel a lot more icky about betting on those teams. I feel relatively good betting on the Cincinnati Bengals. I think that next year the AFC North gets even a little bit easier. They swept the Steelers this season. I would expect much of the same next year. Just in terms of an instant, in-division schedule evaluation. And the Browns, who knows what they'll look like next season with Baker Mayfield struggles here. He is expected to be their starting quarterback. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to push here is that I think that Cincinnati's offense is still going to be a force to be reckoned with next year. And if that is the case, Joe Mixon benefits from that. You move the football down the field, you get more goal line opportunities. That means a surplus of touchdowns. Joe Mixon had 16 total this year. Again, something that could regress, but he's also one of those players kind of on the bubble where that number's not so ridiculously high in terms of 16 scrimmage touchdowns. That's a high number compared to most, but not something that you expect to fall off a cliff unless he were to get injured. He could burst into that 20-point marker, or 20 touchdown marker, that is, and have an eruption of points if this Bengals offense continues to get even better with Joe Burrow now in year 3, Jamar Chase into year 2, Higgins into year 3, and everything is sort of coming together for this team. So I think there's a lot to like with Joe Mixon. He is just like a Jonathan Taylor, a pure workhorse runner. He has more 30-yard rushing attempt games than any other running back I can think of off the top of my head. And then that doesn't even factor in the receiving involvement. And in 2020, Mixon had his season cut short due to injury, but he was still seeing those freakishly large rushing volume contests. If they don't have to, they don't want to send another running back on the football field. They want to depend on Joe Mixon and play power running football and send that ball over the top in the passing game. So Joe Mixon there at the 1.9, I feel pretty good about that one as well. Obviously, this all seems great on paper before these teams hit the field next season, but I'm really liking how this board is coming together, at least if this was my situation up on the clock. Najee Harris here at the 110. The reason, and I think I will get some pushback for this one, the reason I would draft Najee Harris behind a Joe Mixon is the exact situation we talked about with Joe Mixon and then comparing him to Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey. I think Najee Harris, I know he is the... Actually, I don't know this. I'm gonna click on this. So Najee Harris is in his second season, but is he actually the younger player? Let's check that out. Najee is going to be 24 heading into next season. He's 23 at the moment. I think Joe might be 24 or 25 though. Oops. Uh-oh. I messed up, guys. I really goofed that, didn't I? Somehow I put Saquon Barkley in there, but that's all right. We're exploring right now. Joe Mixon, here he is. 25. All right, so he is certainly older. Najee's not going to catch up by a year and a half in one offseason. But the point being here is that Najee Harris is a little bit of an older running back. That's okay. He's still in his second NFL season. He was fantastic this year, had more touches than any other running back from scrimmage, that being receptions plus rushing attempts. The reason he falls below Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, Joe Mixon, despite the fact that he is younger, you would expect his shelf life to be a bit longer than those players, is the situation. Quarterback could be such a disaster for the Steelers next year that I think it could totally derail the value of this Pittsburgh offense. Think about how bad they were this year. Yes, they made the playoffs. I mean, hilariously, if you were on Instagram yesterday or Twitter or Reddit or literally any social media platform out there, if you heard Big Ben Roethlisberger, saying, wow, we don't have a chance, let's just go have fun, that was fantastic, first of all. But second of all, if you watch the Steelers game, so back to the point here is that Big Ben basically just totally dumped his team. Who knows if he's trying to just sweeten up the Chiefs and set them up for a big upset, but it was really funny to listen to him say that, just basically count himself out and say the Steelers have no shot, so they're just going to go have fun playing football, and that they're the 14th out of 14th team, they're the 14th, so the last and worst team of the 14 teams in the playoffs. So that was quite the listen there if you heard that little bit of that press interview there. But think about how hard, if you watched the Pittsburgh Steelers this year, how hard they had to try to get a first down. Like, it was painful. It was 2-yard flat route to Deontay Johnson, smoke screen to Deontay Johnson, and then, it's 3rd and 6. Every single drive. And then they would throw a slant to Deontay Johnson, and he'd either drop it or get 7, and then the process would start over again. So this Steelers offense was about as clunky, as inefficient, as unexciting, as boring, as unproductive as it possibly could have been this year. And a quarterback change is needed and going to happen this offseason. And all signs point towards Big Ben Roethlisberger retiring after his playoff exit. I see next to no shot that he makes an upset and obviously gets his way to the Super Bowl. I just don't think Pittsburgh is talented enough for that, or they have the offensive firepower at the quarterback position to get them there, or out of the first round against Kansas City. But that's going to impact Najee Harris. And for a player who already wasn't uber efficient this season, who doesn't have a great offensive line, who has that big question mark, and that is a big deal at the quarterback position. I think that that's a reason for concern and a reason why Najee Harris could be a bust in 2022 fantasy football, and something that I am trying to become very aware of right now. Now, I will say, Pittsburgh could go out and trade tomorrow for Aaron Rodgers if the Packers somehow manage to get eliminated before the divisional round playoffs. Not possible, so maybe not tomorrow. Pittsburgh in a month could go trade for Aaron Rodgers or a Deshaun Watson. And that would totally change the way I think about Najee Harris and this offense entirely, because I think that now Chase Claypool finally has someone that can throw the ball downfield to him. I think that Deontay Johnson can finally start running deep routes downfield again. And heck, even Ray McLeod and Juju Smith-Schuster, if he comes back, could have some sort of a role in this offense. So that's when things would start to get interesting for me. However, right now, with the current information we have, and I'm going to kind of contradict myself here and go back on this with my pick at the 112 position, but with the information we have right now, I don't feel good enough about Najee to have him higher on the board. However, I will preface that's something that could totally and entirely change today if we did get news about that quarterback spot. So I love the skill set. He's a bruising 3-down running back and can catch the football out of the backfield, but today I would not draft Najee Harris all that high for the reasons I just stated. At the 111 pick here, I got to head the direction of a Justin Jefferson. I talked about him while I think I was talking about Davante Adams in that little segment there. His route running, his poise, the intangibles he possesses as a receiver in not only his rookie year, but then into the second season, which we just experienced here, I can't imagine what he's going to bring to the table in year 3. Now, the reason that he is below a Cooper Kupp, a Davante Adams, is first and foremost, I think that the quarterback situation is the worst of the 3 players. Kirk Cousins is a slightly above average quarterback, like I said, at Sunday afternoons at a 12 o'clock game when there's 10 other NFL games going on. He's great, and he can, set up that play action game, get the ball rolling with Dalvin Cook, and hit a deep shot to Jefferson. But 7:20 on a primetime game or whatever time it is in your time zone, I guess, doesn't mean it's the same as mine. In primetime, Kirk Cousins shrinks and doesn't play his best. So Jefferson's talent, though, speaks for itself. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers and Matt Stafford, I think, are better options than Kirk Cousins. If those 2 quarterbacks were throwing to Jefferson, he might just be my highest ranked of the 3 because his prime, I cannot imagine how dominant he'll be. It almost feels like he was in his prime when he entered the NFL, which is a crazy thing to say, but he was the NFL rookie receiving yards record prior to Jamar Chase breaking it this season in 17 games. So take that with a grain of salt or value that how you please. But the point being, he's an excessively talented player. I think Adam Thielen's a bit on the downtick right now. His prime is in the twilight of its career, and I think his days of being a 1,000-yard NFL receiver, a 1,000-yard receiver are kind of dwindling at this point. So Justin Jefferson is certainly someone I would draft in the late first round. If he happened to fall to me in the top of the second, I would love that even more. I think that Tyreek Hill and Jamar Chase deserve to be in the conversation here for this particular spot on the board, but for now, I'm going to put Justin Jefferson there at the 111. And then finally, this is what I was talking about with Najee Harris, where I'm going to kind of go back on my take for Najee with the information we have right now. I don't feel so hot about him, but projection based, and my projection here's where I can kind of wipe my slate clean. My projection for the Pittsburgh Steelers would not be that they trade for an Aaron Rodgers or a Deshaun Watson. My estimation would be Kenny Pickett in the draft, a free agent option. Who knows? Teddy Bridgewater will probably be out there this year. I don't think they'll land a big name quarterback. They could prove me wrong, but that's not what I'm expecting to happen. For Javonte Williams, my explanation for drafting him here at the 112 is that I expect Melvin Gordon to be gone. No longer a Denver Bronco. He had a fantastic last game outside of that costly game-losing fumble that he had, over 100 yards and a touchdown. But my expectation for Javonte Williams would be that he is the lone back, the top dog, the workhorse for this Broncos offense in the 2022 season. And what that means is a whole lot of fantasy points. He's dynamic. He's a smooth pass-catching runner. And he is an absolute bruiser in the open field. He led the National Football League in forced broken tackles, and he was in a 50-50 split with Melvin Gordon for that backfield. So a very physical player. Again, a guy who has the skill sets you look for in a workhorse back. And he could potentially find himself getting a ton of carries. And what's more impressive to me is while I have these concerns and question marks about other players and their quarterback situations, is that with Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater, both Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon, two running backs, found ways to be relatively capable players. Now, it's not that your situation always has to be great to be an elite fantasy running back. You look back to Christian McCaffrey in 2018, 2019, they were certainly not elite offensive teams. But you have a year of a track record with this Broncos team without elite quarterback play. Again, here in 2021, with Melvin and Javonte Williams having mediocre RB2 seasons in a 50-50 split. So if you combine that workload and that usage into one and send one of those players to prosper in 2022, obviously it wouldn't be Melvin Gordon unless Javonte were to have some sort of season-ending off-season injury. That'll be him going forward next year. So it'll be interesting to see where Melvin Gordon goes. He's probably, a guy who could start for Miami Dolphins per se, or even the Houston Texans. But right now it looks like, or at least, again, my projection, my guess would be Javonte Williams is the guy. He is the 3-down player. So that's the reason I have him over other players like a Nick Chubb, who I think has a significant level of infringement from Kareem Hunt in terms of his fantasy upside. That's a big deal to me. Or even another player like a DeAndre Swift, who is someone who has some injury track records. He's missed, I believe, 7 games in his first 2 NFL seasons. And he also has Javonte Williams poking at his touches. So all things to consider there. Those are my top 12 draft picks for the 2022 NFL season. I'll be updating this list accordingly and hopefully regularly here on the channel. I'll also be doing some live fantasy football mock drafts again. A reason to go check out the community Discord server. The link, the invite to that is in the description of today's episode, as you can see on your screen. Go join that up. I'll give you guys permission. I checked that a few times today, so unless we're having conversations, obviously much more than that, but I at least check that a baseline of 2 to 3 times a day. So once you join that up, I have to give you access to your permissions, but that's something you'll obviously acquire once I see you've joined. So go check that out. Go check out Manscaped. Promo code Sizzle, 20% off and free shipping on all of their site-wide products. And thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.